Welcome everyone, Russ Barker here for the inaugural edition of the 2019 Better Crops by Barker video series. For the last 4 weeks and probably a little longer, my neighbors and friends have been asking me on my opinion on the state of the winter wheat crop. So without further delay, I intend today to go out and scout some wheat fields. Let's go. I am starting today's scouting trip in a field of well, it was wheat. It was intended to be a wheat field. It is not a very good one anymore. In this particular field has got about a number of different strokes against it. First of all, it was planted late in October, so it really didn't get a chance to get going very well. We're on a farm of pure and clay loam soil, which for those of you that farm heavy Brookston, you'd say this is more like beach sand than it is clay. But for us in this neighborhood, this is some of the heaviest dirt we have to deal with. It doesn't let water naturally drain very well, and that's the next problem. There's no systematic tile drainage in this farm. It's strictly random, and consequently we've got big areas in this wheat field that are drowned out. I'm sitting in the middle of about 6 acres in this spot, but there's many more chunks just like here. There's even a bit of water still laying in a chunk of the little bit of a hollow back behind me. The last stroke that we have a problem with here as well, it didn't do this wheat any favors. We've got extremely shallow planting depth. We're going to address this a little bit more, but when you have shallow planted wheat, when you add up all the other problems that this field faces, you end up with just what we have here, a field that is destined to be Roundup wheat here in a few days. So that's the first field we're at, and we're going to move on from here. Okay, we moved on to field number 2, and I've just gone around the corner from the previous field. We're still on that same Huron clay loam, and we're still on some late planted October wheat. But there's 2 big differences between this field and the one we are at. There is much better systematic tile drainage. This farm is systematic tiled, so we've got better drainage. We've had forages in the rotation here, so we've got a combination of being able to get the water away, a little better soil health thanks to the better rotation, have created a field here, a field of wheat that's actually worth keeping, considering the price of straw, etc. This field I would suggest we keep. A month ago you wouldn't give 10 cents for it, but today the weather has been kind, and it's allowing even this, again, very shallow planted wheat. In fact, I've got a little plant here where the seed was on top of the ground, but because the soils have stayed moist and it's been cool, it's actually allowing this little plant to set some roots, and it's certainly not going to be a big thrifty wheat plant. However, it will still contribute to yield, and I would suggest this field to be left. It's not perfect. I'm in a bit of a weak spot, but as you can probably see behind, there is enough green and certainly enough plants per foot of row. There's a good 10 to 20 plants per foot of row no matter where you look, and that's worth keeping. So that's the story on this patch. Great, I've now moved on to field number 3, and I haven't traveled any more than 5 clicks from where I started. Just circled the block a little bit further to this particular field. This field, in fact, was planted on October 26th. It was pretty wet and miserable, but it was the last day in this area that you could think about sticking wheat in the ground. On Saturday it started raining, cold, miserable, and that continued for another few days after that fact. So you really wondered whether this wheat was going to amount to anything, but it actually is the best field of the 3 that I've been in so far. It is more consistent, it's more uniform. You can probably see that in the shot behind me. It's the same soil type again, that Huron clay. It has good drainage, so we've got good water infiltration capacity here. And the biggest difference though, why this field is more consistent, is seeding depth. We've got wheat that's been put in the ground. Seed was put in the ground in this case a good 1.5 inches. And what that does, wheat is a little bit like corn. Corn needs to be in the ground because it sets its crown, wants to set its crown just below the soil line. Wheat is the same way. to protect that crown and to allow this wheat to grow vigorously, it wants to have that crown slightly just at or below the soil surface. That does a wonderful job of protecting it. You've got better root development down below because it doesn't have to fight so hard to kind of get roots in top of this little bit of dry soil on top when it does dry out. So consequently, the end result is a much more uniform stand. They're small, they're slow coming, however, they're here, and we've got essentially full stand of wheat. Again, 3 weeks ago, you kind of scratch your head and wonder, but today this field is certainly worth keeping, and it's got pretty reasonable yield potential, depending on how the weather treats us from here on in. So that's field number 3. We're moving on to field number 4. Okay. We've moved on to another field that we wanted to illustrate a couple of key points. Here we've got a planting date difference. I showed up with seed into this field mid-October, the second week in October, and as soon as I got here it started raining, and consequently we've got this side of the field was planted just on that date. 2 weeks later, we were able to get back, and put seed back in the air seeder, and they finished this side of the field in that very last few days in October. And the difference, what I want to talk about here, the difference in the growth is striking. This is actually Perth clay. It's even a little heavier than the Huron clay. It's very flat and level, but it's still got reasonable water infiltration. It's systematically tiled. It's got reasonable water infiltration. But if you look at these plants that are 2 weeks difference, it is amazing this difference in growth and physiological state. Again, this wheat was in the ground where it was supposed to be. The seed was in there at an inch to an inch and a half, and again, it'll be a little tough to see, but that crown that I spoke of in the previous video, the crown here is developing just below the soil surface, right where it's supposed to be. And the mid-October wheat, in addition to a main stem, has got 2 to 3 strong tillers that will all contribute to yield coming out of this crown. Conversely, the here it is. The wheat that is 2 weeks later, it's mostly a single stem. It doesn't have the same tillers. It's just kind of thinking about starting it, but it doesn't have the same tillering. It will tiller some. There's no question. It might put another 1, maybe 2 if we're lucky, before physiological development just takes over and it stops tillering. But this illustrates again the importance of being able to sneak wheat in the ground earlier versus late. And people are going to say, okay, well, what's the yield potential difference? Now, on this side of the field, we've got extremely strong yield potential. There's no question. This wheat over here has with a little Mother Nature cooperating, it's got over 100 bushel potential. This side of the field, it's a fool's game to predict it exactly, but if somebody gave me 85 bushel today, I'd take it. There are spots that you can't see where we're sitting, but there are spots where we've got killed out wheat on this side. Personally, I'm not sure I'd be able to stomach keeping it with all the drowned out spots. However, again, I could understand other folks' point of view that they would like to hang on to it given the environment we're in and the economic circumstances we're in. But those are the things I wanted to illustrate in this field: planting date and crown development relative to soil line. Take care. Okay, we're in probably the last field we're going to visit today. This particular field, it's a little different than what we have been in previously. We've got pretty gentle, loamy ground here. This stuff's high yield potential soils. And this was an edible field last summer. Came off in September. Wheat was planted in late September. You can see behind me, it's just a gorgeous stand of wheat. Extremely high yield potential in this kind of environment. But in spots, and these spots are not very big, but it's an example of one that I'm sitting in here where we've got dead wheat. And what happened here is that last February, after the melts in January, last February it froze hard, and you could have had a skating party here in this spot. I know that for a fact. You would have had a solid block of ice, probably 3, 4, 5 inches thick, and right to the soil line. And what that does is that it completely starves the wheat of oxygen. Wheat needs a bit of oxygen. Under snow, it's fine. Under a light layer of ice, it's fine. There's still enough air getting in. But when you have a solid block, and that solid block stays there for a number of days, it will kill wheat and kill it just dead as a doornail. And that's what we've got here. It's not unusual in the early planted wheat fields in this area, but in pretty much every situation, it's an extremely low percentage of the field. This is a 50-acre chunk, and I doubt if there's an acre, it might be an acre, acre and a half, that's killed by that ice injury. So that's the story from this field. So we're back in our office in our comfortable chair, and to sum it up, what have we actually learned? Well, first and foremost, locally, I would never criticize any customer friend that decides they want to keep a less than ideal field. We here are not used to looking at replants. I can count the number of times I've faced replant in probably the fingers of one hand. And so consequently, our decisions here are based far more on emotion than they ever are, in fact, in figures. And every time we're going to run across these fields, we'll be second guessing ourselves, whether it's nitrogen and whether it's going through a fungicide, or certainly that final pass of the combine. We might be kicking ourselves in the rear every time we run across the field. But let's use that opportunity as a learning experience and use that as we go forward and fine-tune management the next cropping cycle when wheat comes time to plant that crop this fall. Lastly, I would say that if you do keep these so-so fields, let's put the boots to them. We're going to need to get everything we can out of them. Keep your nitrogen rates high, maybe even 10% over what you're normally used to putting on. Sulfur, 15 to 20 pounds of sulfur. The spring is being a little cool and wet to start. Sulfur could very well end up being our limiting factor. Fungicide use, yes, and this we continue to use fungicides, and many of you in this area just I know it's a slam dunk. We always do it. In addition to the yield and quality improvements, the fungicides keeping that wheat straw clean and dust free is huge in the livestock sector here locally. The bit of export straw that goes south of the border also is nice to keep dust free. It just helps all around. So let's be thankful. We live in a very, very fortunate and well-blessed part of the world. So take care. We'll be back again soon. God bless.